Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of celebrating women in music and exploring their contributions to the artwork that ties into International Women's Day, which was earlier this month, and March just generally being Women's History Month. Now, this is interesting. The track is called The Upward Spiral. So, just in case there is any reference to it, I did re listen to the Downward Spiral, just the track. If there's any references to the album, I'll probably not catch on to those. And I forgot just how heavy that track was. Jeez. So hopefully this one will be a little bit more uplifting since we're going on an upward spiral. Let's dive into this. Bent Knees Upward Spiral.
The horizon is heavy. The water says it could be worse. The air says it will never change. And equilibrium asserts. Grotesque colors that flex, blowing their teeth as they drive. I tell you I need you now more than ever, and you say. And I say, oh yeah, but did you hear me right? And you say. And I get this feeling that you're not really listening, and you say. And I want to tell you that you are the line in the sand, and you say.
This is so good. Really interesting choice of tonality. All right. So I am glad that I went and listened back to Downward Spiral because I might be missing some other homages in that track, but at least the opening minute or so is very reminiscent of Nine Inch Nails' The Downward Spiral. And there's quite a few elements that not only are alluded to, but even borrowed wholesale in a way to just really clearly draw the parallels between the two. I think I'm just going to leave that there because, as far as I know, this is more of just that. It's an homage, it's a little tip of the hat, it's a little Easter egg, possibly. But I don't know that there's any point in pursuing the parallels any further than that. If there is, please let me know in the comments. You know, if they purposefully crafted this for a very specific reason and the allusion to the downward spiral is important to understanding this track, let me know for sure. But as far as I see it, it's just an Easter egg. It's a nice little homage because this is also just how I perceive Bent Knee. They are a noisy band at a lot of times. They can do some wild stuff. They play around with heavy distortion and compression often. This is not too far outside of their wheelhouse. So that's why I think it's mostly an homage. Now, getting into the track, I kind of see this song split up into two modes. We have the opening minute or so that is extremely just noisy, filthy. There's spoken word. Um, there's just massive sounds. Like everything is just humongous. There is this wall that exists on the outside, and it kicks us into this after our more ambient, like opening 5 or 10 seconds, something like that. And it just punches through and hits on the side, and it feels like a vice compressing your skull. Um, in the best way. We run into this again closer to the end, and the same thing. We come from near silence to just having this massive wall of white noise on the sides. Um, and I don't even really know what to make of it other than just explaining all the parts of it. I mean, we have these huge walls on the side that kind of give us our sound sphere. We have these wailing. I don't even know. How do you describe this? It's like, I don't know. It's like whale noises, but really high pitched, mixed in with like the pulsing of radar. And it's just like soaring over everything with all this other white noise. There is a sort of guitar riff in here, but the pitches themselves are buried beneath the just massive sound of these guitars. There are changing notes. I can pick that up, but I don't exactly know what notes they are. It's just this center movement. Um, and then there's probably a bunch of sounds I didn't hear that are just going to contribute to this noisy chaos. The thing is, though, is that when the drums come in, there is a groove to it all. It's difficult to parse any single idea that's happening harmonically or melodically, but you can just feel this crushing weight just moving inward. It gets claustrophobic, but there's a groove you can latch onto and just kind of like, yeah, okay, okay. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. I know where I'm going now. I'm not stuck in here. There's a way out. I just got to follow it, right? And I love how the drums with this groove actually pull us out of this chaotic funk. And we eventually shift towards a more, I don't know if I should say palatable, because we move away from the spoken word into loud, clean vocals with a ton of compression on them that give them this electricity, this energy, and also makes them sound like fry screams. These are also pushed way into the background, more so than the spoken word was, which is always really interesting. It's a auditory illusion. I've talked about this before. Compression and pitch and electricity and air pressure all give the ideas of extra volume. And yet, in this case, it's quieter than the spoken word, which naturally we would assume is a quieter sound. So it always kind of fights against my brain, at least. I don't know if anybody else has this as well. Just kind of dealing with expectations versus presentation. When it sounds like volume should be increasing, I'm expecting a louder section, and when I don't get that, it's weird. It's like looking at a painting and you can kind of see things, but when you look at them, they're not what you thought they were. In fact, they're just kind of shapes. I guess in a bizarre. Nope, that doesn't work either. I was gonna refer to pointillism, but pointillism actually makes sense at a point when you back up from the picture. It just doesn't make sense when you're right next to it and all you see are the dots. Now, this is like, I don't know if there's a term for this. Anyways, it sounds weird even though it makes sense. And my brain always has a tough time dealing with that. Um, but yeah, that's exactly what's going on here too. Is that it sounds like she's singing louder. There's more production on it that sounds like the volume should be increased, but it's actually quieter than the spoken word. Um, so that part is not exactly palatable, and there's still noise going on, but there's more of an element of groove and melody going on. It's still a very chaotic, noisy atmosphere, but we're beginning to see more and more elements here that are more traditionally aligned with composition. And it was up to this point, I think, what are we, like a minute and a half, minute 45 into the track? Well, I guess coming up to the halfway point. This is where the parallels to Downward Spiral pretty much ended for me. At this point, we kind of dropped it down a little bit and explored more of the melodic elements of the song. It was still a little noisy, but the vocals were gone entirely, and it was all about crafting a specific atmosphere, which, while still heavy in several ways, while still compressed and distorted and gnarly, seemed to lighten up a little bit. I don't know if that was just me. We explored several ideas here that all sort of moved towards this concept of cohesion. Maybe it was just me getting used to the style. I don't know. Um, but it just felt like things were starting to click. The instruments weren't working together to create noise or dirt or grime. They were working together to create a dirty song. And that may not seem like a big distinction, but it is to me at least. There's a big difference in my mind about just creating a gritty atmosphere and creating a gritty song. And a lot of it has to do with what the intended goal of our voices are. And here I think is where the idea of the song starts to come together, at least for me. Um, but what I thought was interesting is this song's called The Upward Spiral, and maybe it actually works much like the Downward Spiral as an introduction to an album and not a self contained idea. That may be true here. but there is a small allusion towards a contained concept where we start out on the floor, right? Where dirt and dust and grime collects. You have to clean your floor or, it gets dirty, right? Trust me, this is going somewhere. It's a weird start, but we're going somewhere. If you're spiraling off of the ground, you're going into the air, which has its own problems, like pollens and uh, dust that hasn't fallen. I don't know, but it's perceived as clean, right? In some places, not all places. We got dirty air some places, but the idea of the upward spiral of getting away from the dirt and the grime and improving your situation, which is the opposite of the downward spiral, which found the character's way down into the utter recesses of, the darkest parts of his mind. Here we're coming out of a darkness, we're coming out of the chaos, we're coming out of the noise, and I think it's really interesting that the song gets away from noisy atmospheres, chaotic atmospheres. Like I said, it still kind of has that grit, that grime, but they're less chaotic. They're more unified. The instruments are coming together, not necessarily to create a wall of sound, but to create music. We are on an upward spiral here, with each section becoming just a little bit more typically composed and aiming for a shift from a gritty atmosphere to something with foundation, harmony, melody. So I found it really strange when, right before our outro, we shifted back to that noisy, yelled section. I guess we could even call it a chorus in this case, since it is a repeated element. We actually add some of that grit and that dirt back. We still have the groove and we have a melodic idea in our vocals, but the guitars return back to an atmospheric sound rather than a harmonic one. And so it almost feels like taking a step back. And it kind of confuses me. But like I said, it's possible that this is designed as an album opener and introduces some of the concepts for the album, much like the Downward Spiral does for the Downward Spiral album. But I don't know if this is supposed to be understood as a single track. I'm really curious what the lyrics are, because we do have this element of stumbling backwards, which goes against the title, especially since the song, I don't think after this point, catches its footing. Is that a phrase? And takes steps forward again. Speaking of that, though, after this repetition of the chorus, we move into our outro, which is just a fade out of noises. We kind of return to that overall noisy element. There is no melody anymore. We've regressed fully and we fade out on that. Like I said, it's really strange. And it makes me lean in the direction that this is not to be understood as a singular, isolated track. However, there's so much in here that I really enjoy. It's everything about Bent Knee that I still don't know why I haven't listened to their stuff yet on my own. Yeah, I have no excuse for that. Everything I've heard from them I absolutely love, and it's because of most of what's on display here, which is just an immaculate balance between texture and melody. In a lot of ways, Bent Knee comes off to me as noisy music, whether you want to view that as something adjacent to noise rock, or if you want to look at it as something closer to an avant garde approach or an experimental approach to writing rock music. They always find a way to work in these really gritty textures, even in their more palatable tracks that I've heard. They just have this fascination with grimy sounds, and they're kind of masters at making humongous tones for their instruments. Um, but regardless of that, which is typically a negative for me, they always find a way to balance in ideas that I typically enjoy in music: harmony, melody, counterpoint. I think part of it is just that they have so many people in their bands. They have like 6 or 7 people, I think. Three of them, four, five, six, all of them. I'm trying to remember that live video we saw. All of them play multiple instruments, I think, except the drummer. But I think I've even seen the drummer with the keyboard next to him, at least at one point. They just have such a timbre variety around them that it's almost impossible to have all these people who can play all these instruments and have all this at their fingertips and say, well, we're just going to do one thing. No, like that. It's almost impossible for them to do that. There has to be some sort of a pull, um, an inclination towards utilizing everything in every song, because I feel like they do. And they showcase so many facets of music composition through that exploration of all the tools they have at their disposal. And it's what keeps me coming back. They do interesting things with the stuff I like by combining it with things I typically don't in ways that is appealing to me, at least. So, like I said, I need to dive into their works. I don't think I've been disappointed with a single bent knee track. Their lyrics are always strange, matching their musical ideas sometimes. But musically, they're always on point for me. Speaking of lyrics, let's get into it. Interestingly, the lyrics also seem to be about 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and about coming out of not necessarily a spiral itself, but breaking from mental restraints. Specifically, in this case, it seems possibly social situations. The opening stanza is their typical bonkers metaphor that I'm sure makes sense to them and probably makes sense to some of you, but completely goes over my head. The horizon is heavy, the water says it could be worse, the air says it will never change. It's an equilibrium of sorts, grotesque colors that flex, baring their teeth as they drive. That means nothing to me. Um, but then we get into stuff that, at least on the surface, does make sense to me. We have a repetition of a back and forth in the vocals that I kind of don't remember, but I'm going to assume was probably some background vocals that were doing the call and response that I didn't pick up on. It's somebody who says that they need some emotional support. It says, I need you now more than ever. And you say, and this, I guess, is a background vocal, says, yeah. And I say, well, yeah, but did you hear me right? And you say, yeah. And I get this feeling that you're not really listening. And you say, yeah. And I tell you that you are the line in the sand, and you say, yeah. Um, so like I don't know how to feel about this in particular. On the surface, it almost seems like at the beginning this person is going to be a shoulder to lean on, but by line 3, it could kind of be taken either way. It says, I get the feeling you're not really listening, and you say, yeah. Not not really listening, right? They're just saying yeah over and over and over. You ever been in a conversation like that? The other person's not paying attention. They just want the story to finish up so you can stop talking to them. Like, mm-hmm. Wow. Dude, that's crazy. I can't believe that happened. Yeah, 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 yeah. uh, but then after it, this is the interesting twist. It says you have it all figured out, you feel safe in your house, you turn around and look around and realize that I'm you and you are me and I am you. So that makes me think that we're not necessarily talking about another person, but possibly two, I don't want to say entities, but two parts of one mind, if that makes sense. Um, because I don't want this to move into like multiple personality disorder kind of deal. I don't think that's it. I think this is just the general idea that um, most people have multiple selves. In that, no, we're just gonna stick with that. And if you get it, you get it. If you don't, maybe another day. But anyways, this idea that the self needs to work together to move forward, which actually does kind of line up with some lyrical elements of the downward spiral on the whole, which is about the main character and then his darker desires. And the two of them have conversations throughout. They're actually two different characters in the story. So we do have this duality of the self here presented as well. So maybe there are more parallels here than I gave it credit for. Anyways, though, it's really interesting that at this point, we have the side that feels safe and has it all figured out, and the side that needs support. And realizing that they're actually both the same and maybe come together. And at the end, I think this was our chorus that was repeated. It says, I'm complacent inside the crowd, waiting for a pat on the snout, frightful, I might scuff up my brow. How messed up is that? And I think it's really interesting, this, because it almost presents a person who is not typically comfortable in social situations, but is fine here actually now. And they're like, "What is this? This is so abnormal." But it's this idea of improving, right? Oh, this doesn't come at the beginning of the album like Downward Spiral does. Okay, so this is probably not an album opener. But it's this idea of improving yourself and your mental health, dealing with anxiety in healthy ways, and getting to a point where you can do things you couldn't before, and just like, wow, what even is this? This is wild. um, so maybe it isn't two steps forward, one step back. So it's interesting then that the music starts gritty, gets cleaner, and bell curves back down to the gritty by the ending, feeling like we've hit a cycle, when lyrically it feels like we're actually pulling out of the spiral. I don't know. Those are my thoughts on Bent Knees, the upward spiral. I'm curious what y'all have to say. Did you enjoy it? Was there anything that stood out to you? Was there anything you didn't like, or maybe you thought I said something wrong and you want to correct me on it? And of course, if you have any extra information about the parallels between this and the downward spiral, please let me know about that as well. All of that in the comment section. Above that is a description box, and there's a link for a Linktree. Takes you here. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. And above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. Alright, we have a special selection. Otherwise, see y'all tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.